Okay, so Happy New Year, guys. It's January 1st, 2023. And I finished making the broken tree photograph this week and decided to record myself preparing to put it on the wall. This is another video that I have not done before, so I thought it might be interesting for you guys to see how I do this. Now, when I had a lab, did it differently because I had all this equipment. But I kept the framing tools, the equipment that I had, which I have a chopper, so I could buy 10-foot long pieces of wood and chop it to whatever size I want to make frames. That saves a lot. I mean, frames are really expensive now, so it helps to be able to make your own frames. I don't use the nailer, which nails underneath, because it just takes up too much space. It uses a compressor. So that's, I gave that to a friend to use. But anyway, so I nail by hand. But I have frames that I make that are set sizes, and I have plexiglass and glass cut. So I'm going to be using that later on to show you how I frame a photograph. And then I don't mount with a mounting press anymore because I got rid of that. I had a 55-inch mounting press and an 86-inch or 90-inch mounting. They were huge. So I just use a noodle used for swimming. I learned this from a friend named Tom. He showed me how to do this. So you just get these foam things that you can put around yourself when you go swimming so you don't drown. I put a piece of a stick inside there, and I use that to press down but you'll see all that when it comes up. Okay. So first thing I'm doing is I'm spotting the prints that I already finished. And now I'm preparing to cut boards. Now I use acid-free foam board to mount on. And then I back it with just a regular, any kind of board. I don't use corrugated cardboard because it's got way too much acid. So I usually use chipboard or something like that, something inexpensive. And I do mat the print with acid-free mat board. But again, I don't have my mat cutter, so I just do that by hand. So I'm going to show you how I do all that. That's coming up. So right now, you'll see me cutting acid-free foam board down to 20 by 24, which is the size I'm going to be framing this print at. So I've already talked about how I retouch prints, so I'm skipping that. Now, when I use my straight edge, I just use a razor, and I will caution you the first cut is made with very little strength. You're just setting the groove. You're running along the straight edge, and just very gently to create a groove. And the second cut can go deeper. Now, foam board is really easy to cut, so it doesn't take a lot of pressure. But when you get to mat boards and stuff, you might have to cut 3 times. But don't ever use a lot of strength, because you can run into your hand because you're not using a mat cutter. So I've seen it happen where employees were rushing and they cut into their fingers and run into emergency and stuff. So when using razor blades, use very little strength just to get the groove going, and then use a little bit more strength on the second cut, and on the third cut you can press down. You'll feel that the board underneath. Now what I'm using is a self-healing mat underneath. You see that gray thing there? You can cut into that and it doesn't fall apart. It self-heals, so to speak. So right now I am positioning the print on the center, well, a little bit higher than center. Left and right is centered. And I measure from where I want the print to be cropped by the mat board. So it's not the edge of the print that I'm looking at. I'm looking at the image. And I always put a little bit more space on the bottom, especially in this one, because I'm going to write this little text underneath the print anyway, so I need a little bit more space on the bottom than I normally have. I usually have anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch, or even 1/2 an inch if the print is really large, more on the bottom than the top. So once I determine that the print is positioned correctly, I put a little tick mark with a pencil on the foam board, so I know where the top right and bottom right corner sits on that board. And you'll see me that I just placed the print upside down on a some piece of plastic that keeps it above the board there, because I'm going to spray adhesive on that print. I use my hand to determine if there's any grit. If there's any grit on the board or the print, it will show up as a dimple after you mount. So I do the same thing when I'm pressing prints to flatten. If you refer to that video where I'm using a heat mount press just to flatten prints that have been dried overnight. These are fiber-based prints, so they don't dry flat. So I use my hands. My fingers can tell if there's the slightest bit of grit, and so that's what I rely on. In the lab, we used a compressor with air that blew everything out of the way, but because you can't put your hand on the print because the roller's going, you don't want to get your fingers stuck underneath these giant rollers. But I use my hand. Now right now you see me spray adhesive. I use a adhesive meant for photographs. It's made by 3M, and I put quite a bit of adhesive on it. That's another thing. You can't skimp on this stuff, otherwise you'll get an air pocket. So now you see me lifting it. The adhesive is on the back of the print, and I'm referring to those corner marks that I made so that I can position it correctly. And then I just tack it down, and since I don't have that rolling press, I use that noodle, and I just roll it through on top of the print, and then I press down on it. And this actually does a pretty good job. I mean, I've been doing this for years now, and nothing's ever come up. Apparently, the spray adhesive made by 3M is supposed to be archival and acid-free and all that good stuff. Anyway, I got cans of that. Then after I do this, I cover it with a piece of foam, and I weigh it down, and I let it dry for about an hour before I proceed. So you'll see me using Robert Cameron's Above series of books to put over the print, and it'll sit there for an hour while the adhesive cures. And then I just get a cup of coffee and I come back. Okay, so after a certain amount of time, I removed the books. You can see these large Above series of books that Bob published in his lifetime, and they do well as a weight. So now that the print has been adhered to the acid-free foam board, I take it and I use it to refer to now as I make my overlay mat. I always check the print against a reflection from the overhead lights to see if there's any dimples. Even if there was one, I wouldn't be able to get rid of this. So, but generally speaking, I don't have any issues mounting prints. I don't like to mount prints as a rule, because you can't rewash prints that have been mounted. I do have prints that are really old, and I found that When I rewash prints and I tone them again, I increase the blacks by as much as 2/3 of a stop. So I do that on occasion, but I can't do that with prints that are mounted, obviously. But anything like 16 by 20 or larger, they generally have to be mounted so it doesn't kind of wave inside the. It kind of fluctuates, and when you look at it, it's not flat. So, especially if the moisture changes in the house, you'll see that. I've made prints and put them in the bathroom, and they get really wobbly from the shower, from the moisture from the shower. So now you see me cutting in the overlay mat. Now this is acid-free mat board, and I don't use very thick board because I don't like to use a lot of strength when I cut through mats. And it's only to keep the print away from the glass, really. You don't want any prints touching the glass or plexiglass of the frame. Otherwise, the emulsion will just stick to it. And I've seen many framed prints after 20 years get adhered to the glass, and you can't remove it safely. So the mat board does that, but I also use a spacer, which you'll see later on. So there's always an air gap between the print and the glass anyway. So now I'm marking the overlay mat so that I can draw a pencil line exactly where I'm going to be cutting. And it should fit precisely over the print so that it crops the image the way you want. There have been times when I've made mistakes and I've had to throw away mat boards because I wasn't paying attention, but generally speaking, it's pretty straightforward. Again, there's always a little bit more space on the bottom of the print. If you center a print exactly, it looks a little off for some reason. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. Incidentally, I did print this image on the Ilford Classic paper. It turned out that my Ilford, the master exposure I have, which I make with my 21-step grayscale negative that I made myself. I have if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I have a series of exposures on my darkroom wall, which I write down my master exposure for every paper I have. So I know that for grade number 2, I got to use 0 magenta, 0 yellow, a light level of 2.2 at 25 seconds. And at grade 3, I'm using 50 magenta at 28 seconds or whatever. I outlined that in a previous video. But based on my records on the wall, the Ilford Classic paper, this happens to be a 42-inch roll that I have in my darkroom. I cut it down to whatever size I want. That particular paper with grade number 3, which is what I printed this image with, was about 28 seconds was my master. And the RC paper I used, which happened to have been the Adorama paper, grade 3 used 25 seconds. Okay. I would have liked to print this on the Burger warm tone because I like the warm tone of Burger after I tone it. But grade 3 on my 20 by 24 Burger was 76 seconds. Now this is for the same to get the same density on each paper. So if you saw the previous video, my basic exposure for the 8x10 on the Adorama RC paper was 120 seconds. And I wound up using 180 seconds for the classic, the Ilford Classic paper when I enlarged it up to 20 by 24. And so, I had 180 seconds and I had to burn 300 seconds on top of that, you're looking at what, a 6 minute exposure, right? So if I had used a burger paper, it would have been 3 times that. It would have been, because from 28 seconds to the burger exposure, which was 76 seconds, it was like 3 times. So instead of 6 minutes, I would have been standing there for 18 minutes for one print. So that's why I didn't use the burger, and that's kind of what I remembered. Warm tone paper is slower than cool tone papers or neutral tone papers. Okay, so I cut the mat, and it fits on top of the print perfectly. Now I'm using an ATG tape made by 3M, and what that is a double-sided tape that has a release paper on it. So it's a strip of release. I'm pressing down on the release paper, so it's sticking down on the edge of that print, the board. I'm sorry, not the print, but it's sticking down on the acid-free foam board. And I put 2 strips, one on the very edge and one up against where the print is. And I put it around the periphery of the whole print and the edge of the whole board. And you'll see me press down on it, and then I'll take a razor blade and just peel it off. So I do that around all 4 sides. This allows me to put the mat board down above the print and have it sit in the correct position. This ATG tape is a permanent tape. So if you try to remove it, well, right now if you try to remove it, it's not bad. But if you wait like an hour, it sticks permanently, and it'll basically destroy the cardboard if you try to peel it off. We used miles of this stuff when I was in the lab business. We used to buy it by the case, and this happens to be a 1/2 inch wide roll. I like the 3/4 inch, but for some reason it's been discontinued. So most of my supplies I get from a supplier, because I still have a business account through my vendors, so I can still buy this stuff from a framing and mounting supply house. Some of this you may not be able to get unless you have. I mean, you can always buy it in a hardware store or stationery store, but it costs more. And anyway, so now that I've got that done, I'm just putting the tape away, and I will take off the release paper, about 50% of it. You'll see me peel it off, and I'll roll it back, and you'll see me. Okay, so yeah, there's the release paper. So the adhesive is still on the board, and it's just a release paper coming off. So I do this on all 4 sides, and that allows me to position the mat board that I cut prior to sticking it down onto the adhesive. So you can just watch me do that. The finishing department at my lab, I remember Hank used to do this really quickly. I'm not as fast as those guys, but this is basically what they did when they were faced with framing. Okay, so you can see the release paper hanging off on the edge, and I'll just position this and make sure it's centered before I tack it down. So keep in mind, this is permanent. If you don't want it to be permanent, they make a cloth tape that you can adhere to the inside top, so it kind of folds down, and you can always remove that. But yeah, this is meant to be kept flat. And once again, I take a piece of foam and I weigh it down. So I do that, and then I wait about 45 minutes or so and let it cure. And then we're ready to frame it. Okay, and now we're back. So basically, that's how I mount and mat a print. Oh yeah, another thing I do before is if you want to sign your print, this is the time to do it. Generally, you use pencil. Graphite is going to last longer than a pen. I'm talking 30, 40 years. I've used markers to sign prints before. And although a marker, a permanent marker, will work better signing the edge of a print, it fades if you leave it on the wall. So the ink will fade. So I prefer using a pencil to sign on the matte board. So all I'm writing now is the name of the print, The Broken Tree, and I am writing this little text below it, which it wound up being a haiku. And it's basically what I'm writing is, I used to stand tall, but hollowed out by life now. It's time for rest. Yes. I put in the yes just to make it less morbid, less heavy. You know, it's a bit of because, like I said, one of my actually, it was a middle school. Back then we called it junior high school. A junior high school friend, which I reconnected with. When he got this little camera picture of this broken tree and this little bit of text I wrote, he thought there was something wrong with me, that I was sick and dying. So I decided to make it a little less heavy. The print is still heavy. The print still looks the way I want, but the text turned out, I just changed it a little bit. Okay, so now I'm getting the frame that I made. So I've got, a few of these. Again, that's cut from 10-foot long pieces. I just buy inexpensive black wood frames. And it's got enough depth there so that I can put a spacer. Okay, so what you'll see is these are little strips of black plastic that has adhesive on it with a release paper, and with a pair of scissors you can simply cut them to the right length. So it goes to the inside and it sticks to the wood after the glass is placed into the frame. This secures the glass, and it's like a 1/4 inch gap of air in between the glass and the print. So if you do mount and you don't use an overlay mat, you can use a spacer to prevent the print from touching the glass. Okay, but I'm just using a spacer as well. So okay, so now I'm going to get a piece of glass, and you have to clean the glass. Oh yeah, one more thing I mentioned, I'm just getting some chipboard to put on the back of the acid-free foam. So, you know, I think at this point I cut a 20 by 24 piece of regular cardboard and put it behind the mounted print. So I'll wait for me to do that. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. So yeah, the whole procedure, spotting the prints to getting it framed, all in all, I would say it took about 4 hours. But to be honest with you, most of the time when I do this, I don't do one print. I usually frame 3 or 4 prints at a time. But yeah, this one I only did one, and I did it just so that you guys could watch me do it. Pretty standard. I mean, I'm sure there are framing people out there that do a much better job than I do, especially when cutting and making frames, because my edges aren't perfect. The people that I hired were really good at it, but it's a knack. Not everyone's going to be good at cutting boards or mounting, and you know, some people are really good in the darkroom. They don't do well in the finishing department. Some people do well in the finishing department. You wouldn't put them in the darkroom. So I kind of learned everything when I was in the business, but I wasn't good at everything. I was okay, I guess. Okay, so this is a camel hair brush. Dust is a real issue when you're framing. So when I do this, I don't breathe, because I don't want to breathe and cause dust to fall on the print while I'm in front of it. And now I'm getting a piece of glass, 20 by 24 glass, which fits perfectly if I made the frame right. Sometimes I make the frame too small. Then I can't use glass. I have to use plexiglass and cut the plexiglass to a specific size so that it'll fit the frame I made. Either that or I destroy the frame. Okay, so now I have to clean the glass. So I look at the reflection. Oh, okay. What I'm doing now is I'm putting the spacer in, and the adhesive is exposed once you peel off this release paper. Much like the ATG tape, you peel off the release paper and the adhesive is exposed, and that adhesive is pressed against the wood, so it holds the glass down, and it causes a 1/4 inch gap between the glass and whatever goes behind that spacer. You can get wider ones. You can get, if you have really expensive wood frames, you can get really deep wood frames and get spacers that are like 3/4 of an inch. And it really helps if you're using this non-glare glass. Museum glass is pretty expensive, but when you use a spacer and museum glass, the artwork, really, the reduction in the glare is pretty remarkable. But I don't usually use museum glass anymore. I mean, I did when I was in the business, but it's so expensive. They also sell museum plexiglass, which is even more expensive than glass. It's like $1,000 just for a sheet of 4x8, and you can cut it down to whatever size you want. That's what it used to cost anyway. Okay, so around the periphery, I am putting the spacer, and then I will have to clean the glass. Now what I do is I look at the glass against the reflection from overhead, and I try to look at any piece of dust that would sit, because after you frame the artwork, you don't want to have to remove everything because there's a piece of dust in the middle of the print or something, right? Actually, dust and things, they really stand out mostly in that white border. That's where you really notice it. So it's often difficult to see if there's anything, any impediment there that causes the distraction when you're looking at a print. So I will put I'll put the print in, and I'll just secure it loosely and turn it around and look at it. And most often I have to remove it and get rid of that piece of dirt that's on the glass or on the print. And what I use is a piece of tape. I just use the tape, and the tape sticks that piece of dirt sticks to the tape, and I lift it off the glass. That's what I do. So that's what you'll see me do. So I actually am using a piece of tape on my finger right now to remove what I can see. Sometimes you have to use glass cleaner, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just using some Windex, putting on some tissue, and I'll wipe down one side of the glass that just didn't look clean enough for me. And if you have a large piece of art and you don't know this trick of using tape, it could be a real frustrating task to put everything back together, take it apart, go back and remove that piece of dirt. And when you put it back together, another piece falls into another area of the glass, and you put it back together. And I've known people that had taken artwork out of a glass frame like 4 or 5 times in order to finally get it clean. And it's very frustrating. So you don't want to breathe. Hold your breath. You move slowly. Okay, now you see me. That's a nailer for frames. It shoots this piece of metal into it, and then now I'm looking at it, and I'm finding a couple of pieces that's underneath the glass. So now I have to remove it. Remove those nails that I just put in 4 nails. So it was easy to remove, and go back to the glass and use a piece of tape to pick up the dirt that I saw. And hopefully no new piece of dirt will fall on the glass while I'm doing this. These are all tricks of the trade, I think, that I'm trying to show you. Of course, there are a lot of people out there who have framed more prints than I have. They're more expert at it, and their joints at the framings, the joining of the edges of the frames are perfect, whereas mine have a little bit of a gap. So, but I'm not going to go to the store and spend $180 on a 20 by 24 frame. I think this frame, with all the materials included, probably costs less than $50, maybe $40. The wood is about $1.50 a linear foot. That's all the wood costs. It's not real good wood. If you get really good wood, it costs 20 times that. But for me, this frame probably costs $45, and a lot of labor. So there's a restaurant in South San Francisco where I framed about 20 of these. And making my own frames saved me a lot of money, because those frames are 24 by 30, So it's even larger than this one. So yeah, it helps that I was in the business for 50 odd years, and I moved from department to department. So I had experience in every aspect of the lab business. Interestingly enough, one of the main things I learned about photography was learning in the copy department. Learning how to copy artwork, copy prints, aligning the camera, getting the perfect exposure, getting the perfect color balance, not just for transparencies, but for color film, taught me a lot. Yeah. So copy work was really instrumental in teaching me basic photography. Okay, so now I'm just, I think I'm going 8 inches down, and I'm making a little mark, and I'm going to drill a starter hole to place the eyelet so that I can put a wire on the back of that frame. And I just use a screw, a self-starting screw, and a screwdriver, and I place a hole, and then I remove it. So that hole is there, and I just go to the other side. Yeah. I think they make screwdrivers like that. But I just use a regular screwdriver. I take a little screw, and then I take 2 eyelets, and I screw them into these holes just to get it started. And I use a plier to sink it in at a depth where it will hold. And then I put wire on it, and I'm done. So that's pretty much it. No other. In my business, my guys used to put a backing paper on the. They would put glue on the back of the wood frame and put a piece of paper and let it dry overnight, and they would trim off to the edge. So the back of the print didn't expose the cardboard like that. And they used they didn't use an eyelet, they used a flat piece of, it was like a ring or something. And it looks nicer, but I don't worry about that. I just do like this. And that's a 20-pound wire hanger system. I think it's good up to 20 to 25 pounds. And there's another roll on the table there. It's go up to 45 pounds, I think. 45 to 50 pounds. And this wire is surrounded with plastic. So I have, you buy this plastic on the outside of the wire that prevents you from being cut, because when you have plain wire, it corrodes easier. You're talking 25, 40 years, it'll corrode and actually get rusty and fall apart. But with the plastic, it prevents the water from getting to the wire itself, and it's a lot easier to handle. It doesn't, the edges don't poke into your fingers like if you're using regular wire. So that's nice. And I always use 2 hangers when I hang prints, unless it's like a 5x7 frame. I don't use 2 hangers, but I have okay, so there it is, frame. So you can see on the bottom there's text there, and there's more space on the bottom. So I'm pretty pleased with the print. It's it's what I would call a low-key picture. A high key would be something with a lot of white in the background, which is kind of how it was shot. There was a lot of fog. It was an overcast day, and I wanted a low-key picture, so that's how I proceeded. So here I'm just, I've got these hooks, these picture hanging hooks with all these nails. So I'm just getting 2 out. And then I decided to hang this above the piano, next to my, time to hang the photograph above the piano. There you go. So it's hung. And the broken tree, I used to stand tall, but hollowed out by life now. It's time for rest. Yes. That's my little haiku. And it's, there's a picture on the left that my friend George shot and sent to me from Romania. And in between is a print, this is my Ansel Adams print, the Golden Gate Before the Bridge. Okay, so that's it. Thanks, and Happy New Year.